At my wife's ultrasound, the doctor started shaking violently. He pulled me aside into a corner, his face pale as a sheet, and whispered, "You need to leave now. Get a divorce immediately." I asked why. He replied, "No time to explain. You will understand when you see this." What he showed me next made my blood boil so hot I thought my veins would burst. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, walked out of that clinic, and started planning the most ruthless revenge my family would ever see. Before I tell you how I destroyed their lives, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe betrayal should always be punished. My name is Richard Dalton. I am 62 years old, a man who built his empire in real estate through patience, strategy, and an iron will. I thought I could apply those same principles to my family. I thought love was an investment that always yielded returns. I was wrong. The air in the private clinic that Tuesday morning smelled of antiseptic and expensive perfume. My wife Vanessa was glowing. At 32, she was exactly 30 years younger than me, a former runway model whose beauty could stop traffic. She sat on the examination table, her hand resting protectively over her small baby bump, looking at me with eyes that seemed full of adoration. "Oh, Richard." "Isn't it a miracle?" she cooed, squeezing my hand. "After all these years of trying, God finally blessed us. Our little angel is finally here." I smiled back, feeling the warmth of her palm against mine. For a moment, just a fleeting second, I let myself believe her. I let myself feel the joy of a man about to become a father again in his twilight years. I looked at the high-definition monitor, waiting for the first glimpse of the life we had created. But then I looked at Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans had been my personal physician and friend for over 25 years. He was a man of science, stoic and unflappable. I had seen him deliver bad news about cancer diagnoses without blinking. But today, as he moved the ultrasound wand over Vanessa's abdomen, his hand began to tremble. It started as a small tremor barely noticeable, but soon his entire arm was shaking. He dropped the wand. It clattered loudly against the metal tray, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small, sterile room. "Oops, clumsy me," Dr. Evans muttered, but his voice was tight, strained. He didn't pick up the wand. Instead, he stared at the screen, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and recognition. He wasn't looking at a miracle. He was looking at a crime scene. "Is everything okay?" Dr. Vanessa asked, her voice pitching up with a performance of concern that was just a little too perfect. "Is the baby okay?" Evans didn't answer her. He turned his back to the screen, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. He pressed a button on the intercom. "Nurse, please escort Mrs. Dalton to the lab. We need to run a specialized blood panel immediately. It is standard procedure for pregnancies at this stage." Vanessa frowned. "But Richard should come with me." "No," Dr. Evans barked, his voice unusually sharp. "Richard needs to stay here. We need to review his insurance updates. It will only take a minute. Go now." Vanessa hesitated, looking between me and the doctor. I gave her a reassuring nod, though a cold knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. "Go ahead, honey. I will be right there." As soon as the heavy door clicked shut behind Vanessa and the nurse, Dr. Evans didn't waste a second. He walked over to the door and locked it. The click of the deadbolt sounded final, like a judge's gavel. He turned to me, and the look on his face was one of pure devastation. "Richard, listen to me very carefully," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You need to get out of that house. You need to get a divorce. Today. Right now." I stood up, confused and defensive. "What are you talking about, Evans?" "The baby is healthy, isn't it? Vanessa is healthy. Why are you acting like someone died?" "Someone might," he said darkly. He walked over to his filing cabinet, his movements frantic. He pulled out a dusty yellowing folder from the bottom drawer. He slammed it onto the desk between us. Dust motes danced in the light of the computer monitor. You are a smart man, Richard. You build skyscrapers. You read contracts that are hundreds of pages long, but you have forgotten the most important contract of your life. Read the date. I looked down at the file. It was my medical history. My eyes scanned the page until they landed on a surgical report dated August 15th, 2005. Vasectomy, Dr. Evans read aloud, pointing a shaking finger at the line. Successful, permanent, irreversible. I performed the surgery myself, Richard. Do you remember? After your first wife passed, you told me you never wanted to bring another child into a world without her. You made me double-check the procedure. The room started to spin. The white walls seemed to close in on me. 2005. 17 years ago. I had completely forgotten. In the haze of grief after my first wife died, and then the years of raising my stepson Tyler, and then meeting Vanessa. The surgery had become a distant memory buried under layers of new life. But that means I stammered, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. That means you are sterile, Richard. You have 0 sperm count. It is biologically impossible for you to be the father of that child. Impossible. I sank back into the chair. The image of Vanessa's glowing face, her talk of miracles and blessings, suddenly twisted into something grotesque. She wasn't just lying. She was performing a masterclass in deception. But who was the father? Oh, there is more, Doctor, Evans said. He wasn't done destroying my world. He turned the ultrasound monitor toward me. He pointed to the grainy black and white image of the fetus. Do you see this curvature in the femur? And here the density of the humerus? I squinted. I see bones. So what? It is a rare genetic marker, Richard. Osteogenesis imperfecta type 1, brittle bone disease. It is a dominant trait. You don't have it. Vanessa doesn't have it. But I know who does. I looked at him, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Who I treated him, Richard. For 15 years. I set his broken arm when he fell off the swing set. I treated his fractured collarbone when he played football. I managed his pain medication. I felt the blood drain from my face. No, it can't be. Tyler, Dr. Evans said the name, and it hung in the air like toxic smoke. Your stepson. He carries the gene. And looking at this ultrasound at the severity of the curvature, there is a 99% probability that the father of that child is Tyler. I felt like I was going to vomit. Tyler. The boy I had taken in when he was 8 years old. The boy whose tuition I paid for. The boy I bought a penthouse for. The boy I loved more than my own life. My wife was pregnant with my son's baby. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I need to kill them, I whispered. I need to kill them both. No, Dr. Evans grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. That is exactly what they want. They want you emotional. They want you reckless. Look at this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked glass vial with a dropper. It looked harmless, like eye drops. What is this? I asked. I swiped it from Vanessa's purse when she went to the restroom earlier, he said. She told the nurse it was a vitamin supplement for you. She said she puts a few drops in your morning coffee every day to help with your heart. My heart? I asked. My heart is fine. Exactly, Evans said grimly. I ran a quick chemical test in the back lab while she was gone. This isn't vitamins, Richard. It is a cocktail of high-dose anticoagulants and a synthetic compound similar to arsenic. It is tasteless, odorless. He looked me dead in the eye. If you keep drinking your coffee, Richard, you will be dead in a month. It will look like a natural heart attack. And your grieving widow and your loving stepson will inherit everything, the empire, the money, the legacy. I stared at the little bottle. It was heavy in my hand, heavier than the steel beams of my buildings. They weren't just cheating on me. They were murdering me. Slowly. Painfully. while smiling in my face. I took the vial and put it in my pocket. My hands stopped shaking. The nausea faded, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was the same feeling I got before closing a multi-million-dollar deal. The feeling of total control. "Thank you, doctor," I said, my voice steady. "What are you going to do?" Evans asked, looking terrified. "Are you going to the police?" "No," I said, adjusting my tie. "Police are for people who want justice. I don't want justice. I want ruin. I want them to suffer." I unlocked the door. "I am going to go out there. I am going to kiss my wife. I am going to tell her I am so happy about our miracle baby. And then I am going to go home and prepare a welcome party for my son." I walked out into the waiting room. Vanessa was there, looking like an angel in her white dress. She stood up and smiled that beautiful, poisonous smile. "Is everything okay, darling? You were in there a long time. Everything is perfect." "Vanessa," I lied, taking her hand. "Absolutely perfect. Let's go home." As we walked to the car, I didn't see my wife anymore. I saw a target, and the war had just begun. Evans slammed a thick, dust-covered folder onto the desk between us. The sound was like a gavel striking a judge's bench, signaling the end of my life as I knew it. He flipped it open with aggressive, shaking hands, pointing at a document that had turned yellow with age. "Read it, Richard," he commanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and pity. "Read the date. Read the procedure." I leaned in, my eyes struggling to focus, as the room seemed to tilt on its axis. The header read, "Patient Richard Dalton." The date was August 15th, 2005. A lifetime ago. A different world. It was the summer after my first wife, Sarah, had passed away from cancer. I remembered the grief, the hollowness, the absolute certainty that I never wanted to bring another life into a world that felt so empty without her. Bilateral vasectomy, the document stated in cold, clinical typewriter font. Procedure successful. Post-operative analysis confirms 0 sperm count. Sterile. I stared at the word. Sterile. It floated off the page, mocking me. I looked up at Evans, my mouth dry as sandpaper. But I stammered, trying to find a logical explanation, trying to defend the woman waiting outside who had just kissed my cheek and called me the father of her child. But procedures fail, don't they? There are medical miracles. Maybe it grew back. Maybe. Evans cut me off with a look of absolute sorrow. "Richard, stop. I performed that surgery myself. I cauterized the ends. I removed a section of the vas deferens. I tested you 3 separate times in the year following the operation. You have been shooting blanks for 17 years. There is no miracle. There is no 1 in a million chance. You are 100% unequivocally sterile." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It pressed against my eardrums. Outside that locked door, my wife Vanessa was sitting in the waiting room, rubbing her belly, glowing with the promise of new life. She was 12 weeks pregnant. She had looked me in the eyes this morning, tears of joy streaming down her face, and thanked me for giving her a family. She had picked out names. She had started decorating the nursery in her mind. And every single word, every smile, every tear had been a lie. A wave of nausea hit me stronger than any physical illness. It wasn't just that she had cheated. People cheat. Marriages fail. It was the magnitude of the deception. She wasn't just hiding an affair, she was trying to pass off another man's child as my heir. She was trying to graft a stranger's bloodline onto my family tree, knowing full well that I would love that child, provide for that child, and leave my entire empire to that child. The math was simple and brutal. If I couldn't create a child, then someone else had. Who? The question burned in my mind. Who had been in my bed? Who had touched my wife? Who was laughing at me right now? Evans watched me, his eyes filled with a grim sympathy. He knew he had just destroyed my world, but he also knew he had to save me from living a lie. "Richard," he said softly, "you are not the father. That baby is not a Dalton. And if you think that is the worst of it, you are wrong. He reached for the ultrasound images again, his expression hardening. I didn't think it could get worse. I didn't think my heart could break any further. But as he pointed to the screen, I realized the betrayal went deeper than just a lover. It went into the very bone and marrow of my life. Dr. Evans turned the monitor toward me, the black and white image of the unborn child flickering on the screen. He tapped a specific area on the image, his finger tracing the delicate white line of a leg bone. Look here, Richard. Do you see this curvature in the femur? And look at the density of the humerus. It is faint, but to a trained eye it is unmistakable. I squinted at the grainy picture. To me, it just looked like a baby. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What are you showing me? It is a marker, Evans said, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. A genetic marker for osteogenesis. Imperfecta type 1. Brittle bone disease. I shook my head, confusion clouding my rage. But I don't have that. Vanessa is perfectly healthy. She has never broken a bone in her life. Exactly, Evans said. It is a dominant genetic trait. It doesn't skip generations like that. If the baby has it, one of the parents has to carry the gene. You are clear. Vanessa is clear. But Richard, think. Think back. Who do we know who spent half his childhood in a cast? The question hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Suddenly a memory flashed in my mind. A 10-year-old boy falling off the jungle gym and snapping his arm like a twig. A 12-year-old boy tripping on the soccer field and fracturing his collarbone. A 16-year-old boy needing special accommodations for gym class because his bones were too fragile for contact sports. Tyler. I breathed the name, tasting like bile in my throat. My stepson. Evans nodded slowly, his eyes full of pity. I treated him, Richard. I was the one who put the plaster on his arm 5 different times. I have his medical records in the archives. He has mild osteogenesis imperfecta. It is rare, Richard. Extremely rare. The odds of a stranger having this specific condition and also sleeping with your wife are astronomical. But the odds of it being the man who lives in your guest house, the man who eats at your table. The room started to spin faster. This wasn't just adultery. This was incestuous, twisted, sick. Tyler. The boy I had taken in when he was just a child. The boy I had raised as my own flesh and blood after his mother died. I had paid for his college. I had bought him his first car. I had given him a job at my firm when no one else would hire him. I had loved him. I had protected him. And this was his repayment. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was breeding with her. They were creating a child right under my nose, a child that would carry his DNA but inherit my fortune. A cuckoo in the nest. Evans confirmed my worst nightmare. Genetics do not lie, Richard. That baby is Tyler's. I would bet my medical license on it. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal roar of betrayed fatherhood, but I swallowed it down. It burned like acid. The image of the baby on the screen, the baby I had cried tears of joy for just minutes ago, now looked like a parasite. A biological weapon aimed at my heart. My wife and my son, they had turned my home into a cesspool of lies. Before I could unleash the scream that was clawing at my throat, Evans moved with a speed that belied his age. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly like a vice, and pressed a small, cold object into my palm. It was a glass vial no bigger than my thumb, filled with a clear, odorless liquid. There was no label, no pharmacy sticker, nothing to identify what it was. "Hide this!" Evans hissed, his eyes darting to the locked door, as if he expected Vanessa to break it down at any second. "Put it in your pocket right now. Do not let her see it." I stared at the little bottle, confused and disoriented. My mind was still reeling from the image of the baby's bones, but the urgency in Evan's voice pulled me back to the present. "What is this?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I took it from her purse while she was in the restroom. Evans whispered. She left her bag open on the counter. She told the nurse earlier that she had to remember to find more of your special heart drops. She said she puts 5 drops in your coffee every single morning because she loves you so much and wants to keep your heart strong. My hand clenched around the vial. My morning coffee. The ritual. Every day for the past 2 months, Vanessa had insisted on making my coffee herself. She would bring it to me in bed, her smile radiant, her voice soft as she told me to drink up for my health. I had thought it was love. I had thought it was devotion. Evans leaned in close, his face inches from mine. Richard, listen to me. I ran a quick reagent test on a single drop of this liquid in the back lab. It turned black instantly. This is not a vitamin. This isn't heart medication. This is a high-dose anticoagulant mixed with a synthetic neurotoxin. I stopped breathing. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. If you go home and drink another cup of that coffee, you will not wake up. Evans said, his voice trembling with the weight of the truth. You will have a massive cerebral hemorrhage or your heart will simply stop beating. And because of your age, because of your stress levels, no one would question it. It would look like a natural tragedy. The grieving young widow would cry at your funeral while holding the hand of your devoted stepson. The horror of it washed over me, cold and numbing. Infidelity was a knife in the back, but this was a guillotine. They weren't just betraying me. They were hunting me. My wife and the boy I raised as my son were actively plotting my execution. They had likely planned it all out. The baby would be the heir. My death would be the payday. And they would live happily ever after in my house, sleeping in my bed, spending my money over my fresh grave. The fear vanished. It was replaced by a cold, mechanical clarity. It was the same feeling I got when I realized a business partner was trying to screw me over, but on a scale I had never imagined. I slipped the vial into my jacket pocket. It felt heavy like a loaded gun. You need to get this to a forensic lab immediately, Evans said. Do not go home, Richard. If you go home tonight, you are a dead man. I looked at my old friend. He was terrified for me. But I wasn't terrified anymore. I was focused. I straightened my tie and smoothed my jacket. I have to go home, I said, my voice dead calm. If I don't return, she will know something is wrong. She will panic. She will cover her tracks. Richard, no, Evans pleaded. Unlock the door. Evans, I commanded. I am not going home to die. I am going home to play the part. They think I am a senile old fool who needs his vitamins. Fine. I will show them exactly what this old fool is capable of. I checked my reflection in the monitor's black screen. The man staring back at me looked the same, but his eyes were different. They were the eyes of a man who had just declared war. Unlock the door, I repeated. My loving wife is waiting. The drive back to my estate was a blur of green trees and gray asphalt, but all I could see was red. The glass vial in my jacket pocket felt radioactive, a heavy, silent reminder that the people waiting for me behind those iron gates were not my family. They were my executioners. As I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, memories began to flood my mind, replaying like a corrupted film reel. I saw the Christmas party from last year. Tyler had his arm around Vanessa's waist, pulling her close for a photo. I remembered standing there with my drink, smiling at them, thinking how wonderful it was that my son and my new wife got along so well. I had felt proud. Now the memory made bile rise in my throat. That wasn't a familial hug. That was possession. I remembered the lingering glances across the dinner table, the inside jokes I wasn't part of, the way Vanessa would giggle like a schoolgirl whenever Tyler walked into the room. I had interpreted it as a mother-son dynamic, perhaps a bit unconventional given their age gap, but innocent. I was a fool, a blind, trusting fool, They had been flaunting it in my face, mocking me with every touch, every smile, every shared secret. They were probably kicking each other under the table, while I carved the roast, laughing at the old man, who was paying for their wine and their lifestyle. I had to pull over to the side of the road. I opened the door, and dry heaved onto the grass, my body physically rejecting the reality of my life. My son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I held when he cried over his mother's casket. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was impregnating her. He was replacing me. He was killing me. I wiped my mouth and sat back in the leather seat, staring at the imposing facade of my home in the distance. The rage was a firestorm threatening to consume me. I wanted to drive through the front door. I wanted to storm into the house and strangle them both with my bare hands. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. But then I touched the vial in my pocket again. If I confronted them now, what would happen? They would deny it. They would gaslight me. Or worse, they would panic. If they were desperate enough to use poison, they were desperate enough to use a gun or a knife if their subtle plan failed. I would be dead, and they would spin a story about a jealous, senile old man who lost his mind. They would still win. No. Violence was the tool of the weak. I was Richard Dalton. I didn't build a dynasty by losing my temper. I built it by outthinking my competition. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate down. I looked in the rearview mirror. The face staring back was pale, but the eyes were hard. I had to become an actor. I had to give the performance of a lifetime. I had to walk into that house, hug the woman who wanted me dead, and shake the hand of the son who was stealing my life. I put the car in drive. I wasn't going home. I was entering a war zone. And the first rule of war is never let the enemy know you are coming. I forced a smile onto my face. It felt tight, unnatural, like a mask. But it would hold. It had to hold. I drove through the gates, the gravel crunching under my tires like bones. The game was on. I stepped through the heavy mahogany doors of my own home and felt like I was walking into a mausoleum. The air conditioning was set to a chill that seeped into my bones, or maybe that was just the realization that I was sleeping with the enemy. Vanessa was waiting in the foyer before I even turned the key. She was wearing a silk robe that I had bought her in Paris, the fabric shimmering under the crystal chandelier. To any outsider, she looked like the devoted wife waiting for her husband. To me, she looked like a viper coiled to strike. "Richard, you are finally back," she breathed, rushing toward me. Her hands fluttered over my chest, checking me, claiming me. "You were gone so long. I was worried sick." "What did Evan say? Is the baby okay? Did he run more tests?" Her questions came rapid fire, a machine gun of anxiety. She wasn't worried about the baby's health. She was worried about the lie holding up. She needed to know if the doctor had seen through the facade. I forced the muscles in my face to relax into a smile. It was the hardest physical exertion I have ever performed. I looked into her beautiful, deceitful eyes and summoned every ounce of business acumen I possessed. "Everything is perfect, darling." I lied, my voice steady and warm. "Evans just wanted to be thorough because of my age. He says the baby is strong, a real fighter, just like his father." I watched her closely. Her shoulders dropped 3 inches. The tension left her jaw. She let out a breath she had been holding for hours. She bought it. "Oh, thank God," she sighed, burying her face in my shoulder. I was so scared. I thought something was wrong. "Come on, let's get you to bed," she said, pulling away and grabbing my hand. "You look exhausted. I made you your special warm milk. I put the heart drops in it just like the nurse said." She walked to the small table in the hallway where a steaming mug was waiting. The liquid looked creamy and innocent. It smelled of nutmeg and vanilla. But I knew better. It was a cocktail of death prepared by the hands that had vowed to love me forever. Here, drink it all, she urged, holding the mug out to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It will help you sleep. You need your rest, Richard. We have a big future ahead of us. I took the mug. The ceramic was warm against my cold fingers. Thank you, Vanessa, I said. You take such good care of me. I really don't deserve you. I raised the cup to my lips, feigning a sip, letting the steam hit my face, but keeping my mouth tight shut. Perfect, I said. I am going to take this to the study. I have a few emails to check before bed. Don't wait up. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She wanted to watch me drink it. She wanted to see the poison go down to ensure her investment was paying off. But she couldn't push too hard without raising suspicion. She nodded. Okay, honey. Don't work too hard. Drink it while it is warm. I walked into my study and closed the heavy oak door. I leaned against it, listening for her footsteps retreating up the stairs. Silence. I walked over to the large potted ficus in the corner, a plant I had nurtured for 10 years. I poured the milky white liquid into the soil. I watched it soak into the dark earth, disappearing instantly. I am sorry, old friend, I whispered to the plant. One of us has to die tonight, and I would prefer it be you. I sat in my leather chair and stared at the empty mug with the white residue clinging to the sides. The game of cat and mouse had officially begun in my own living room. She thought she was feeding a lamb for the slaughter. She didn't realize she had just woken a sleeping dragon. The clock on the bedside table read 2:12 in the morning. The house was entombed in silence save for the rhythmic guttural snoring I was forcing out of my chest. It was a performance I had been refining for hours, lying rigid under the Egyptian cotton sheets, waiting. Beside me, the mattress shifted. Vanessa was moving. I sensed her hesitation, the way she held her breath, testing the depth of my slumber. I let out a particularly loud snort, followed by a soft, murmuring groan, shifting my weight, just enough to sell the illusion of deep, dreamless sleep. It worked. She slid out from the covers with the stealth of a cat, her bare feet making no sound on the plush carpet. I cracked one eye open just a slit. In the gloom, I saw her silhouette grab her phone from the nightstand. She crept toward the ensuite bathroom, closing the door until it was just a hair's breadth from shutting completely, likely to avoid the click of the latch waking me. A sliver of pale yellow light spilled onto the floor. I waited 10 seconds, counting my heartbeats before I slid out of bed. My adrenaline was a cold fire in my veins. I moved on hands and knees, crawling across the floor to avoid the creaky floorboard near the dresser until I was pressed against the cold wood of the bathroom doorframe. Her voice was low, a hushed whisper, but in the dead of night it carried like a scream. "Tyler, pick up," she hissed. There was a pause, then a sigh of relief. Finally. You have no idea how hard it is to get away. He is clinging to me like a leech. I pressed my ear against the crack, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Yes, he bought it, Vanessa said, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. Hook, line, and sinker. He actually cried, Tyler. It was pathetic. He thinks it is his miracle baby. He was talking about setting up a trust fund before we even left the clinic. My hands clenched into fists on the carpet, my son and my wife laughing at my tears. But what came next froze the blood in my veins. Stop complaining, she snapped, her tone shifting to something sharper, more vicious. We have to be patient. We cannot rush this. If he dies before he signs the new will, the current one splits everything between you and, well, mostly you, but the board will get control of the company. We need him to sign the amendment giving full control to the unborn child, with me as the executor. I listened, paralyzed by the enormity of their greed. They had thought of everything. Don't worry, she cooed, her voice softening. As soon as the ink is dry on that paper, I will up the dosage. I will double the drops in his morning coffee and his night milk. His heart won't last a week. It will be quick. And then, baby, it is just you, me, and the Empire. We will sell the company and be in Tuscany by Christmas. I slumped back against the wall, the strength draining from my limbs. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an assassination. They were discussing the end of my life with the casual indifference of planning a vacation. Up the dosage. The words echoed in my skull. I wasn't a husband or a father to them. I was an obstacle. A pig they were fattening up for the slaughter. I crawled back to bed, my mind racing. They wanted a new will, fine. I would give them a will, but it wouldn't be the one they were expecting. I lay back down and resumed my fake snoring, but inside Richard, the victim, had died. In his place lay Richard, the executioner, and I was already writing the script for their demise. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of my study, illuminating a silent tragedy in the corner of the room. The large potted ficus tree, which had been vibrant and glossy just the night before, now looked like it had been scorched by an invisible fire. The leaves were curling inward, turning a sickly shade of necrotic brown, and several had already fallen to the floor, forming a dry, brittle circle around the pot. I stared at it, and a cold sweat broke out across my back. That milk. That creamy vanilla-scented drink Vanessa had handed me with such a loving smile was potent enough to kill a healthy tree in less than 8 hours. If I had swallowed it, that decay would be happening inside my veins right now. My heart would be struggling to pump against a toxic tide while I thanked my wife for her kindness. I grabbed the glass vial from my jacket pocket, checking the seal for the 10th time. I told Vanessa I had an emergency site inspection at the new downtown development. She barely stirred from her sleep, murmuring a groggy goodbye, confident that her plan was unfolding perfectly. I drove straight to a private toxicology lab in the city, a facility that handled discreet testing for high-profile corporate clients. I paid a rush fee in cash. I need to know exactly what is in this, and I need to know. Today I told the technician, my voice leaving no room for argument. The hours of waiting were a unique kind of torture. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the world go by, wondering how many other men were walking around with targets on their backs, completely blind to the assassins sleeping in their beds. When the technician finally called me back, in his expression was grave. He didn't look at me like a customer anymore. He looked at me like a survivor. "Mr. Dalton, we completed the spectroscopy," he said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the metal table. "You were right to be concerned. This liquid is a highly concentrated mixture of arsenic trioxide and a potent anticoagulant, likely warfarin." I looked at the chemical breakdown, the numbers dancing before my eyes. Arsenic. Rat poison. "It is a sophisticated blend," the technician explained. "The arsenic weakens the cardiac muscle over time, causing arrhythmias and gradual failure. The anticoagulant prevents clotting, ensuring that the microhemorrhages caused by the arsenic don't heal. It is designed to mimic a natural decline: fatigue, shortness of breath, chest pain. For a man of your age, if you died in your sleep after a few weeks of these symptoms, no coroner would look twice. They would call it congestive heart failure and close the file. It was the perfect crime. Elegant, silent, and undetectable to the untrained eye. They didn't want a violent, messy end. They didn't want questions. They wanted me to fade away. They wanted me to become weak and dependent, thanking them for every poisoned cup of coffee until my heart simply gave out. They wanted to watch the life drain out of me slowly, while they picked out curtains for their new Italian villa. I took the report and folded it carefully, placing it in my inside pocket, right next to my heart. That heart was beating hard now, not with the erratic rhythm of a dying man, but with the steady, powerful thrum of a predator who has just caught the scent of blood. I had the physical proof. The weapon was in my pocket. I wasn't dying, I was waking up, and they were about to realize that they had tried to kill the wrong man. I drove away from the toxicology lab with the proof of their poison burning a hole in my jacket pocket. Science had confirmed the weapon, but now I needed to capture the gunman in the act. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Vance. He wasn't a cheap private investigator who sat in parked cars eating donuts. He was a surveillance architect, a ghost in the machine, a man who could wire a building so thoroughly that even the house spiders would feel watched. I met him in a parking garage 10 minutes later and handed him a set of keys. I knew their schedules perfectly because I paid for them. Vanessa was at a 4-hour spa treatment, a pregnancy pampering package I had insisted she take this morning. I told her she needed to relax for the baby. She had kissed me, called me the best husband in the world, and drove off in the Mercedes I bought her. Tyler was supposedly at the office, sitting in the executive chair I had given him, though I knew for a fact he usually left at noon to gamble or drink at the club. We had a safe 3-hour window. We started at the penthouse. I stood in the middle of the living room I had purchased for Tyler on his 25th birthday. It was a $2 million view of the city skyline, a gift for the son I thought was making me proud. I looked at the Italian leather sofas I had paid for the wet bar stocked with my vintage liquor, the art on the walls. It made me sick. This wasn't a home. It was a bachelor pad financed by my stupidity. Vance worked in total silence, his hands moving with surgical precision. He placed a pinhole camera in the smoke detector directly above the king-sized bed. Another one went into the frame of the 60-inch television facing the couch. A third one, disguised as a screw head, went into the kitchen cabinetry. Then we moved to my estate. The main house, my sanctuary. We violated the master bedroom. It felt strange, almost perverse, to plant a bug in my own headboard, but that bed was no longer a place of rest. It was a crime scene. Vance hid a high-fidelity microphone behind the vanity mirror, where Vanessa spent hours staring at herself. He put a camera in the ventilation duct overlooking the dining table, and another one hidden in the bookshelf of the living room. We were turning my life into a reality TV show, where the contestants were fighting for a prize they didn't know I had already taken away. By 4 o'clock, we were done. Vance handed me a black tablet. "It is live, Mr. Dalton," he said, his voice void of emotion. "Cloud storage. Encrypted. Motion activated. Audio and video in high definition. If they so much as whisper, you will hear it. If they blink, you will see it." I looked at the screen. It was split into 6 feeds. I saw the empty rooms of my life waiting for the actors to take the stage. I saw the bed where my wife slept. I saw the couch where my son sat. I wasn't just a husband or a father anymore. I was the eye in the sky. I was God watching his creation sin. I sat in my car parked a block away from the penthouse watching the screen. Waiting. The surveillance war had begun, and for the first time I had the ultimate high ground. I didn't have to wait long. At 4:30, the front door of the penthouse opened on the screen. Tyler walked in loosening his tie, and 2 minutes later, Vanessa walked in behind him. I sat in the silence of my car, the tablet glowing on the passenger seat like a portal into hell. The feed from the penthouse bedroom was crisp and horrifyingly clear. I watched as the door swung open, and my wife walked in, followed closely by the boy I had raised. They didn't even wait for the door to close before they were on each other. It was animalistic. There was no hesitation, no guilt, just a raw, hungry need that made my stomach turn. I wanted to look away to throw the device out the window, but I forced my eyes to stay open. I needed to see this. I needed to burn this image into my brain so that I would never, ever waver in what I had to do next. Vanessa laughed as she pushed him onto the bed, the sound sharp and mocking through the tiny speakers. "Did you see his face today?" she asked, her voice dripping with scorn. "He was practically crying when I talked about the nursery. He thinks it is a miracle. He actually believes his dusty old machinery still works." It was so hard not to burst out laughing right in his face. Tyler smirked, pulling her down on top of him. "The old fool is so desperate for a legacy, he would believe the sky is green if you told him. It is pathetic, really. But hey, his desperation is buying us a private island." I watched them together, my wife and my son, tangling in the sheets I had paid for in the apartment I had bought. It wasn't just the physical act that shattered me, it was the casual cruelty. They weren't just cheating, they were reveling in my stupidity. They were getting off on the deception as much as the sex. Then the movement stopped, and they lay there, staring up at the ceiling, right into the hidden lens of the smoke detector. Tyler let out a long sigh of satisfaction. "I have been waiting for this for 20 years, Ness," he said, his voice cold and flat. 20 years of playing the grateful stepson. 20 years of listening to his boring lectures about hard work and integrity. 20 years of pretending to respect a man I can barely stand to look at. Vanessa ran her fingers through his hair. "Just a few more weeks, baby. Once the poison does its job, it is all over." "I am counting the seconds," Tyler replied. "He thinks he is my father. He thinks we have this bond. It makes me sick. He isn't a father. He never was. To me, he is just a walking wallet. And that wallet is finally about to expire so we can spend the cash. A walking wallet." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. I stopped breathing. 30 years. I had taught him to ride a bike. I had sat up with him when he had the flu. I had paid off his gambling debts without a word of judgment, because I thought he was just a troubled kid who needed support. I had held him when his mother died, and promised I would never leave him. I thought I was his anchor. But to him, I was just a bank account with a pulse. I reached out and paused the video, freezing Tyler's face on the screen. He looked so much like his mother, but his eyes were empty of anything human. I looked at that face, the face I had loved for 3 decades, and I felt the last thread of attachment snap. The father in me died in that parking lot. The man who drove away was a stranger even to himself. They wanted a wallet. Fine. I would show them exactly what happens when the bank forecloses. I sat there, in the darkening car. The glow of the tablet, illuminating the steering wheel, staring at the frozen image of my stepson's face. His sneer was pixelated, but the hatred behind it was high definition. A walking wallet. The phrase bounced around the cabin of the car like a ricocheting bullet, finding a new place to pierce me with every repetition. My hands gripped the leather wheel so tight, I could hear the material creak under the pressure. Memory is a cruel editor. It usually highlights the good times, the laughter, the milestones. But now, in the harsh light of this revelation, the film reel of my life was being recut. I saw the night 5 years ago when Tyler came to my study at 3 a.m, shaking and pale. He had racked up $50,000 in gambling debts. There were men threatening to break his legs, he said. He cried on my shoulder, sobbing into my expensive jacket, promising he would change, promising he would go to therapy, promising he would be the son I deserved. I didn't hesitate. I wrote the check that night. I hugged him and told him everyone makes mistakes. I thought I was buying him a second chance. I was just paying the cover charge for his contempt. He wasn't crying because he was sorry. He was crying because he had to ask. He hated me for having the power to save him. I thought about the job. My VP of operations had begged me not to hire him. "He is unqualified, Richard. He is lazy. He will rot the department from the inside out." I ignored him. I fired a good man, a father of 3, just to open up a director-level position for Tyler, because I wanted him to feel successful. I wanted to give him dignity. I spent nights rewriting his reports, so he wouldn't look incompetent in board meetings. I paved the road for him with my own sweat and reputation, and he just drove over it, laughing at the old man holding the shovel. And the loneliness. God, the loneliness. 15 years. 15 years I slept in a cold bed after his mother died. I met women. Good women. Women who could have made me happy. But every time I brought someone close, Tyler would act out. He would sulk, he would spiral, he would guilt-trip me about replacing his mother. So I stayed single. I sacrificed my own happiness, my own chance at love to protect his fragile feelings. I thought I was being a good father, putting my child first. But he wasn't fragile. He was territorial. He didn't want a stepmother because he didn't want anyone else spending his inheritance. I looked at the tablet again, at the woman lying next to him. I had brought the enemy right to his doorstep, and he had opened the gates wide. Every sacrifice I had made, every check I had written, every lonely night I had endured, it wasn't love to him. It was weakness. It was blood in the water. The sadness began to evaporate, replaced by a sensation I hadn't felt in years. It was cold. It was hard. It was the feeling of steel hardening in the forge. They had taken my kindness and sharpened it into a blade to cut my throat. Fine. If they wanted to play with knives, they should have remembered who taught them how to hold one. I turned off the tablet, plunging the car into darkness. The grieving father was gone. The man who drove out of that parking garage wasn't Richard the dad. He was Richard the CEO, and he was about to liquidate his worst assets. The next morning, I walked into the First National Bank downtown, the air conditioning hitting my face like a slap of reality. This was my sanctuary, the place where I kept the tangible fruits of 40 years of labor. The marble floors echoed with the click of my shoes as I marched toward the safety deposit vault. I needed to secure my assets. I needed to move the gold and the bearer bonds before they could get their hands on them. I thought I was ahead of the game. I thought I was being proactive. I was already too late. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, greeted me with a nervous smile. His hands were clasped tight in front of him. "Mr. Dalton, good to see you. We didn't expect you today." I didn't have time for pleasantries. "I need to access box 404, I said, my voice clipping the air. "Now." He led me into the vault, the heavy steel door swinging open with a groan that sounded like a warning. He inserted his master key. I inserted mine. We turned them in unison. He pulled the long metal drawer out and placed it on the table. It felt light. Too light. I lifted the lid. My breath hitched in my throat. It was empty. Not just missing a few items. Empty. The velvet lining was bare. The stack of gold Krugerrands my grandfather had left me gone. The bundle of bearer bonds worth $200,000 gone. The emergency cash reserve gone. $500,000 of untraceable liquidity vanished into thin air. I stared at the gray felt bottom of the box, my mind refusing to process the void. Who, I whispered the word scraping against my throat. Who accessed this box? Mr. Henderson looked at his shoes. "Your son, Mr. Dalton." "Tyler. He came in last Thursday. But he doesn't have a key," I snapped. "And he isn't a signatory." "He had the key," Mr. Henderson said softly. "And he had the power of attorney, the one you notarized last month. The specific limited power of attorney granting him access to this box and your primary checking accounts." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Last month. I was in bed shaking with what I thought was a terrible flu, but now knew was the first round of arsenic poisoning. I was weak, delirious, sweating through the sheets. Tyler had come in with a stack of papers. "Just payroll stuff, Dad," he had said, his voice so concerned, so helpful. "We need to pay the contractors or the site stops. Just sign here and here." I couldn't focus on the text. The letters were swimming. I trusted him. I signed where he pointed, grateful that my son was stepping up to handle the business while I was incapacitated. I hadn't signed payroll checks. I had signed my own robbery warrant. He had tricked me while I was dying. He had looked at my trembling hand holding the pen and smiled, knowing he was stealing my life savings right in front of my face. I closed the lid of the empty box, the metal clang echoing in the silent vault like a gunshot. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were stripping the carcass while I was still warm. They had cleaned me out, or so they thought. Mr. Henderson looked terrified, waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. A cold calm washed over me. This was good. This was evidence. This was grand larceny. This was fraud. And most importantly, this was a mistake. By taking the money now, they had shown their hand. They were greedy. They were impatient. And they had just given me the weapon I needed to destroy them. I thanked Mr. Henderson and walked out of the bank. The sun was shining, but the world looked gray. $500,000 gone. But as I walked to my car, I started to laugh. A low, dark laugh. Tyler thought he was rich. He thought he had won. He didn't know that $500,000 was just the bait, and he had swallowed the hook deep. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, the emptiness of the safety deposit box still echoing in my mind like a hollow drum. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my credit card company. A fraud alert for a suspicious purchase. $5,000 at a high-end menswear boutique in Soho. I swiped it open, my finger hovering over the decline button, but then I stopped. I needed to see the full picture. I needed to know just how deep their greed went. I logged into the online banking portal for the supplementary card I had given Vanessa. It was supposed to be for household emergencies and personal necessities. I scrolled through the statement, and my jaw tightened with every line item. Rolex, $12,000. Armani, $4,000. Versace, $3,000. A weekend stay at the Ritz-Carlton, $2,000. I had never seen Vanessa wear a Rolex. I had never seen her in a Versace gown. I certainly hadn't been to the Ritz with her. The dates lined up perfectly with my late nights at the office or my business trips. They weren't just stealing my money. They were using it to build a lifestyle I was explicitly excluded from. They were dressing Tyler up like a prince with my wallet. I drove to the penthouse again. Vance's cameras were still rolling. I pulled up the feed on my tablet. The apartment was empty, but evidence was everywhere. There on the dresser was the Rolex box. Hanging in the closet, clearly visible through the open door, were rows of Italian suits that I had unknowingly paid for. And on the coffee table, a brochure for a villa in Tuscany circled in red ink. They were nesting. They were building a future, a luxurious, pampered future, on the grave of my finances. They were like parasites gorging themselves on the host before moving on to the next stage of their life cycle. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They didn't even try to hide it. They felt so secure in their victory, so confident that the old fool wouldn't notice a few $1,000s missing here and there, that they were living like lottery winners before the ticket was even cashed. I looked at the statement again. The total for the last 3 months was over $45,000. $45,000 of my hard-earned money spent on the man who was sleeping with my wife and plotting my murder. It wasn't just theft. It was a humiliation tax. They were making me pay for my own cuckolding. I took a screenshot of every single transaction. I downloaded the invoices. I saved the video feed showing the stolen goods in Tyler's apartment. My anger, which had been a raging fire, cooled into something solid and heavy like a stone in my gut. They thought they were smart. They thought they were getting away with it. They didn't realize that every swipe of that card was another nail in their coffin. I wasn't going to cancel the card. Not yet. Let them spend. Let them dig the hole deeper. When the time came, I would bury them in their own debt. I started the car and drove toward my lawyer's office. It was time to prepare the legal noose. James Blackwood was the kind of lawyer who didn't just win cases, he annihilated the opposition. His office was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking Manhattan, a cold, sterile environment where empathy went to die. I sat across from him at his obsidian desk and laid out the evidence. The toxicology report confirming the arsenic. The DNA probability regarding Tyler. The surveillance photos of them in bed. The bank records of the theft. I expected him to be shocked. I expected him to pick up the phone and call the district attorney immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and smiled. It was a predatory smile, the look of a shark smelling blood in the water. "Richard," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "this is magnificent. You have enough here to put them away for 20 years. Attempted murder, grand larceny, fraud. It is a slam dunk." "Then let's do it," I said, leaning forward. "Let's call the police. Let's freeze the accounts. I want them in handcuffs by dinner time." Blackwood shook his head slowly. "No. That is the emotional play. That is what a victim does. If you arrest them now, they will get lawyers. They will claim the poison was for rats and you ingested it by mistake. They will claim the money was a gift you forgot about because of your failing memory. They will drag this out in court for years, and while they are out on bail, they will spend every dime you have left defending themselves." I stared at him. "So what do we do? Do I just let them keep poisoning me?" "No," Blackwood said, standing up and walking to the window. "We give them exactly what they want. We give them the rope to hang themselves. You said they are waiting for you to sign a new will, right? That is the trigger. They won't make their final move until that paper is signed, because right now, if you die, the estate gets split and the board takes the company. They want it all, so we give it to them." I frowned. "You want me to sign my death warrant?" "I want you to sign a decoy," Blackwood explained, turning back to me, his eyes gleaming. "We are going to draft a new last will and testament today. It will be everything Vanessa has ever dreamed of. We will name her the sole executor of the estate. We will name the unborn child, whom you will acknowledge as your biological heir in this document, as the sole beneficiary of the Dalton Empire. We will cut out the board. We will cut out the charities. We will give them the keys to the kingdom." I felt a chill run down my spine. It sounded insane. "Why would I do that?" I asked. "Because the moment you sign that document, they will stop being careful," Blackwood said. "Their guard will drop. Their arrogance will skyrocket. They will think they have won, and that Richard is when they will make mistakes. That is when they will accelerate the poisoning. That is when they will transfer the money. We need them to feel untouchable so we can catch them in the act of the kill, not just the planning of it, but the document," I argued. "If something actually happens to me, they win." Blackwood pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. "Not if we include a kill switch, a clause buried so deep in the legalese that neither Vanessa nor Tyler will ever spot it. A clause that invalidates the entire will based on a single specific condition, one that they cannot possibly meet." I looked at the lawyer, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. A trap. A honeypot. "Draft it," I said, my voice hard. "Make it look perfect. Make it look like I am the most gullible, loving husband on the planet. I want them to salivate when they read it." Blackwood picked up his pen. "Oh, they will, Richard. They will be so blinded by the dollar signs they won't see the bear trap until it snaps their legs off. Let's get to work." Blackwood slid the final draft across the mahogany desk. It was a masterpiece of legal deception. To the untrained eye, specifically the greedy eye of a trophy wife and a spoiled stepson, it looked like the key to the city. It was thick, bound in heavy blue paper, and smelled of money. On page 1, it declared Vanessa Dalton the sole beneficiary and executor. It granted her immediate access to the accounts, the properties, the stock options. It was everything they were willing to kill for. But then Blackwood flipped to page 44. He pointed to a small paragraph buried in the middle of a section regarding administrative protocols. It was labeled simply Clause 47B. It looked boring. It looked standard. It was the most dangerous sentence I had ever read. "Read it," Blackwood said, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. I looked down and read the fine print. "Notwithstanding the foregoing provisions, any and all transfer of assets to the beneficiary described herein as the unborn child of the testator, is strictly contingent upon postnatal genetic verification. Such verification must be conducted by an accredited independent laboratory and must confirm with 99.9% certainty a direct biological paternal relationship between Richard Dalton and said child. In the event that genetic paternity is not established, or if the executor refuses such testing, all assets shall immediately bypass the named beneficiaries and transfer in their entirety to the Dalton Charitable Trust for the Preservation of Wetlands. I looked up at Blackwood. It is perfect. They will never look for this. They are too arrogant. They are counting your money before you are dead. Blackwood agreed. They will scan the first few pages, see their names, see the amounts, and stop reading. They think you are a senile old fool who is so desperate for a legacy that you would sign anything. They rely on your trust. They rely on the fact that you believe the lie. They don't know that you know about the vasectomy. They don't know that you know the baby is Tyler's. To them, this clause is irrelevant because they think they have fooled you completely. And if they do read it, I asked, playing devil's advocate. Blackwood shrugged. Then you play the hurt old man. You tell them it is just standard boilerplate language the lawyers insist on for tax purposes. You tell them you didn't even read it. You tell them that since the baby is yours, they have nothing to worry about, right? If they argue, they admit they are lying. They are trapped, Richard. If they sign this, they are agreeing to a DNA test that will strip them of every single penny. I ran my hand over the paper. It felt like a shield. This wasn't just a will. It was a confession form waiting to be signed. By witnessing this document, Vanessa and Tyler would be legally acknowledging that the validity of their inheritance hinged on a lie they could not maintain. And the best part, Blackwood added, leaning in, once they sign this, they will accelerate. They will want to get rid of you before the baby is born, before any complications can arise. They will think the money is locked in. They will become sloppy. And that is when we catch them. I took the pen and signed the draft copy, my signature flowing and confident. I wasn't signing away my fortune. I was signing their eviction notice. I was signing the document that would turn their victory lap into a death march. I closed the folder. Give me the official copy, I said, standing up. I have a performance to give. I have to go home and tell my wife that I have finally secured our future. I have to look into the eyes of the man who wants me dead and tell him that I am giving him everything he deserves. And God help me, I am going to enjoy every second of it. The heavy leather folder sat on the mahogany coffee table between us like a loaded weapon. I slumped into my armchair, letting out a dry, rattling cough that I had been practicing in the mirror for the last hour. It wasn't hard to fake. The sheer exhaustion of living with these vipers had left me drained, but I dialed up the performance to a Shakespearean level. I let my hand tremble as I reached for my glass of water, spilling a few drops on the coaster. I saw Vanessa's eyes dart to the water, then to the folder, and finally to Tyler. They were sitting on the sofa opposite me, trying to look concerned, but the air around them practically crackled with anticipation. Tyler was bouncing his leg, a nervous tic he always had when he was waiting for a payout. Vanessa was gripping her wine glass so hard her knuckles were white. They looked like vultures circling a carcass that wasn't quite dead yet. I am sorry, I wheezed, wiping my mouth with a handkerchief. I don't know what is wrong with me lately. I just feel so weak. The doctor says it is just age, but I feel like I am fading, Vanessa. Oh, don't say that, darling, Vanessa cooed, leaning forward. Her voice was dripping with synthetic honey. You just need rest. But did you manage to see Mr. Blackwood today, you know, for the baby's sake? We just want to make sure everything is settled so you don't have to worry. I nodded slowly, reaching for the blue folder. Yes, I whispered. I told him to give you everything. I told him that my wife and my unborn child are the only things that matter. I flipped the folder open. The crisp, heavy bond paper lay there waiting. I saw Tyler's eyes widen. He was practically salivating. He wasn't looking at a legal document. He was looking at sports cars, penthouses, and a life without work. He was looking at my death. I pulled my fountain pen from my pocket. I let my hand shake violently as I brought the nib down to the signature line. I paused, lifting the pen, breathing heavily. "Here, let me help you, Dad," Tyler said, reaching out. It was the first time he had called me Dad in months. The word sounded like an insult coming from his mouth. "No," I said, pulling back. "I have to do this myself. For the family." I pressed the pen to the paper. I signed my name. Richard Dalton. With every loop of the letters, I wasn't signing away my fortune. I was locking the door to their prison cell. I was sealing the trap that Blackwood and I had dug. There, I gasped, dropping the pen as if the effort had exhausted my last reserve of strength. "It is done. Vanessa, you are the executor. Tyler, I need you to witness it." Vanessa snatched the document up almost before the ink was dry. She pretended to scan the text, but her eyes were just checking for the dollar signs and her name. She didn't flip to page 44. She didn't look for clause 47B. She just saw the victory. She signed the witness line with a flourish. Then she handed the pen to Tyler. He signed with a grin he couldn't hide. He looked at me, and for a second the mask slipped. There was no love in his eyes, only triumph. He thought he had just won the lottery. "Thank you, Richard," Vanessa said, closing the folder and holding it to her chest like a shield. "You have done the right thing. Now we can all relax." I sank back into the chair, closing my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "Now we can relax." Inside, I was screaming with laughter. They had just signed a document that legally mandated a DNA test they could never pass. They had just agreed to their own bankruptcy. They thought I was the weak, dying old man in the chair. They didn't know that the man sitting across from them was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and the trial had just ended. The ink on the new will had barely dried before the atmosphere in the house shifted from cautious deception to reckless impatience. Before signing the document, I was a project they were managing slowly, but now that they legally owned my future, I became a loose end they needed to tie up. The change happened at the dinner table. For weeks, Vanessa had been playing the role of the doting nurse, ensuring I took my medicine and ate my healthy meals, but suddenly the portion control vanished. The flavor of the food changed. It was a Tuesday evening when she served her signature mushroom risotto. It was usually my favorite dish, rich and creamy, but as I lifted the first forkful to my lips, the smell hit me. It wasn't just the earthy scent of truffles. Underneath the garlic and the parmesan, there was a sharp metallic tang, a chemical bitterness that made my survival instincts scream. I looked up at Vanessa. She wasn't eating. Her wineglass sat untouched. Her hands were folded on the table and her eyes were locked on my mouth with a terrifying intensity. She looked like a predator waiting for the trap to snap shut. I knew in that moment she had tripled the dosage. She wasn't trying to make me sick anymore. She was trying to stop my heart before the weekend. I forced a smile, my hand trembling not from age but from the sheer effort of not throwing the plate at the wall. "This looks delicious, darling," I said. But I knew I couldn't eat it. If I swallowed this bowl, I wouldn't wake up. I had to improvise. I had to become a magician at my own dining table. I took a bite and immediately brought my heavy linen napkin to my mouth, feigning a cough. I spit the rice into the fabric, folding it over quickly. I did it again and again. I complained about the heat. I complained about having trouble swallowing. I engaged her in rapid-fire questions about the nursery, forcing her to look away so I could dump spoonfuls of the toxic rice into the empty flower vase on the center of the table. But I knew I couldn't fake it all. To sell the lie, I had to swallow a few bites. The poison burned my throat going down. It tasted like betrayal. "Excuse me," I gasped, standing up abruptly and clutching my stomach. "I don't feel well." Vanessa didn't jump up to help. She didn't rush to my side. She sat there, and watched me stumble toward the hallway, her face a mask of cold calculation. "Go lie down, Richard," she called out, her voice eerily calm. "It is just your digestion acting up again." I made it to the downstairs bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet to mask the sound and immediately forced myself to purge. I spent 10 minutes heaving over the toilet bowl, expelling every grain of rice, every drop of saliva, trying to get the poison out of my system. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes were bloodshot and my face was gray. I wasn't acting anymore. I was fighting for my life. I realized then that my timeline had just collapsed. I didn't have weeks to execute my plan. I barely had days. If I stayed in this house and played their game for one more meal, I would be a dead man. They had escalated the war. It was time for me to drop the bomb. I washed my face, took a deep breath, and walked back out to face my executioner, knowing that this was the last supper she would ever serve me. While the poison was slowly working its way through my physical veins, I was busy injecting a lethal dose of reality into the financial veins of my company. I knew I couldn't save my health until I secured my legacy, so I arranged a meeting that would dismantle everything Tyler thought he was about to inherit. I didn't meet my vice president Samuel in our glass-walled conference room, where Tyler could see us. I met him at a dusty roadside diner 20 miles out of town, a place where truck drivers ate breakfast and billionaires went to disappear. Samuel had been with me for 30 years. He started as a foreman and worked his way up. He was the only man in the world I trusted. When I slid the documents across the sticky laminate table, his eyes widened in horror. He read the terms of the sale, the immediate transfer of all controlling shares to a blind trust, and the liquidation of the operating capital. "Richard," he whispered, his coffee cup trembling in his hand. "This is suicide. You are gutting the company. The stock price will tank. The board will revolt." I looked him in the eye. "The company is already dead, Samuel. If I die next week, Tyler takes over. Do you know what he will do? He will sell the assets to buy sports cars. He will fire the veterans to hire his frat brothers. He will bankrupt this firm in 6 months. I am not killing the company. I am putting it in a lifeboat and cutting the rope." I watched him sign the papers. With a few strokes of a pen, the Dalton Group technically ceased to be my asset. I transferred the voting rights to Samuel effective immediately, but with a 48-hour non-disclosure embargo. To the world, and especially to Tyler, I was still the owner, but legally I was a ghost. Then came the money. I opened my secure laptop and logged into the corporate treasury. Tyler was the acting director, but he never checked the accounts. He was too busy spending the interest to worry about the principal. I initiated a series of wire transfers that I had been setting up for days. $10 million moved to a numbered account in Zurich, $15 million to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Another $12 million converted into cryptocurrency held on a cold storage drive in my pocket. I watched the progress bars fill up green. One by one, the domestic accounts that Vanessa and Tyler were drooling over hit zero. The operating accounts were drained down to the bare minimum required to keep the lights on for another week. I was stripping the copper wiring out of the walls while they were busy measuring the drapes. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from the corporate expense account. A charge for $5,000 at a VIP club in the city. Tyler. He was celebrating. I could picture him sitting in a velvet booth surrounded by sycophants popping bottles of champagne that he hadn't earned, bragging about how the old man was finally stepping aside. He was probably telling girls that he was the CEO of a real estate empire. He had no idea that he was currently the CEO of an empty shell. He was swiping a card that was about to be declined. He was the captain of a ship that I had just scuttled, and he was too drunk on his own ego to notice the water rising around his ankles. I closed the laptop and took a sip of lukewarm coffee. It tasted better than the finest wine. I had just moved $40 million out of their reach. When the time came for the reading of the will, they wouldn't just be disappointed. They would be destitute. I thanked Samuel, told him to prepare for the storm, and walked back to my car. I was poorer on paper than I had been in 40 years, but I had never felt more powerful. The ink on the papers selling my company was barely dry when I walked into the mortgage department of the private bank that had serviced my accounts for decades. I wasn't there to deposit checks this time. I was there to borrow. I sat across from the senior loan officer, a man who looked at my credit score with reverence, and told him I wanted to mortgage the estate. My estate. The sprawling colonial mansion in Connecticut that sat on 10 acres of prime land. The house that Vanessa loved more than she loved me. It was appraised at $6 million. I owned it outright. No debt, pure equity. To Vanessa and Tyler, this house was the crown jewel of their future kingdom. It was where they planned to raise their bastard child. It was where they planned to throw parties with my money. I requested the maximum loan-to-value ratio allowed. $5 million in cash. Immediate disbursement. The officer asked why. A man of my wealth needing a mortgage at this stage in life was unusual. I lied smoothly without blinking. I told him I was seizing a hostile takeover opportunity in the tech sector and needed massive liquidity without triggering a tax event by liquidating my stock positions. He bought it. Why wouldn't he? I was Richard Dalton. I was a titan of industry. He pushed the papers across the desk, eager to earn the commission on such a massive loan. As I signed the promissory note, I wasn't just taking out a loan. I was gutting the house. I was scooping out the value like the inside of a pumpkin, leaving only the rotting rind behind. When I die, the deed will transfer to Vanessa, yes, but so will the lien. The moment the bank realizes I am dead, or the moment the payments stop, they will call the loan. Vanessa will have 30 days to pay back $5 million plus interest. If she can't, and I know she can't, because I just drained all the other accounts, the bank will foreclose. They will be evicted. They will be thrown out on the street with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The funds hit my account an hour later. $5 million. I didn't keep it there. I immediately wired it to the same offshore trust in the Caymans, joining the millions I had stolen from the company. Click. Sent. The money was gone. The house was now legally a hollow shell. A debt trap wrapped in brick and ivy. I drove home and pulled into the circular driveway. Vanessa was on the porch directing a gardener on where to plant new expensive rose bushes. She waved at me, smiling, acting the part of the lady of the manor. She looked at the house and saw a fortress of wealth, a guarantee of a life of leisure. I looked at the house and saw a ticking time bomb. She was planting roses on a sinking ship. I waved back, suppressing a dark laugh. Keep decorating, honey, I thought. You are just increasing the resale value for the bank. You think you are sleeping in a palace, but you are actually sleeping in a foreclosure notice. And the best part was she would never know until the sheriff came to change the locks. Saturday night arrived with the thumping vibration of a bass line that shook the floorboards of the exclusive rooftop lounge Tyler had rented. I watched from the entrance as waiters marched out in a line carrying trays of vintage champagne bottles with sparklers attached to them. The sparks showered down like gold dust, illuminating the faces of the social climbers and hangers on that Tyler called friends. Each one of those bottles cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and Tyler was popping them open and spraying the contents onto the floor just because he could. He was using the supplementary black card I had intentionally left active. He didn't know he was burning through the last fumes of a credit line that was about to snap shut like a steel trap. When I stepped fully into the room, leaning heavily on a cane, a prop I had added to my repertoire recently, Vanessa rushed over. She didn't come to welcome me. She came to hide me. She took my arm with a grip that was firm and steering me away from the VIP section, where the young and beautiful people were congregating. She led me to a small round table near the service entrance next to a swinging kitchen door that smelled of dish soap and stale grease. "You will be more comfortable here, Richard," she said, shouting over the music. "It is too crowded over there." You know how you get overwhelmed in your condition. We don't want you having an episode in front of everyone. I sat down in the wobbly chair, my back to the wall. I was the financier of this entire circus, yet I was being quarantined like a leper. I watched as Tyler climbed onto a velvet banquette, grabbing a microphone. His face was flushed with alcohol and the intoxicating rush of power. He commanded the room's attention. "I want to make a toast," he slurred, raising a magnum of crystal. "To the future, to taking what is ours. And a special shout-out to the man who made this possible." He pointed a shaking finger toward the dark corner where I sat. The spotlight swung around, blinding me. "My stepfather Richard over there in the back," Tyler yelled. "He is getting a little frail these days, a little confused upstairs if you know what I mean. But he insisted on funding the party, right, Pops? Give it up for the old man." The crowd laughed. It wasn't a warm applause. It was a pitying chuckle. They looked at me, the gray-haired man sitting alone near the kitchen, and they saw a walking checkbook, a senile relic who was fading into the background while the new king ascended the throne. Tyler smirked at me, a cruel, twisted expression that said, "You are nothing." But the humiliation didn't stop there. The DJ slowed the tempo and Tyler pulled Vanessa onto the dance floor. It was supposed to be a moment for family, but it was grotesque. He pulled her too close. His hands roamed too low on her waist, resting on her hips with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. Vanessa didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her head resting on his chest, her eyes closed in a look of pure adoration that she had never given me. They swayed together in the center of the room, bathed in purple light, flaunting their sick betrayal in front of 100 witnesses who were too drunk to notice or too paid off to care. I sat in the shadows, my hand gripping a glass of water, until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't sad. I was counting. Every bottle they opened, every laugh at my expense, every inappropriate touch was fuel. I watched them dance on the deck of the Titanic, totally unaware that I had already steered them into the iceberg. Enjoy the music. Tyler, I thought, it is the funeral march for your future. From my exile in the shadows near the kitchen doors, I became a ghost in my own life. The thumping bass of the music vibrated the floorboards, rattling the silverware on my tiny table, but I sat perfectly still. My hand rested casually on my phone, which was lying face down on the sticky tablecloth. The screen was dark, but the voice memo app was running in high sensitivity mode, capturing every sound in the room. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was a wire. Tyler stumbled away from the dance floor, his face slick with sweat and champagne. He collapsed onto a leather sofa just 10 feet away from me, surrounded by a group of his sycophantic friends. He didn't even look in my direction. To him, I was just part of the furniture, a senile old man who had probably fallen asleep in his chair. His arrogance was his blind spot, and I was sitting right in the middle of it. One of his friends, a young man with slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than my first car, leaned in and shouted over the music, "Dude, this party is insane. But seriously, how are you covering this?" I thought the old man was tight with the purse strings. I held my breath, willing the microphone to pick up the response. Tyler laughed, a loud, wet sound that grated on my nerves. He took a long swig from a bottle of Grey Goose and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Don't worry about the old man," he shouted, his voice slurring, but unmistakably clear. "He is on his way out." His friends laughed nervously, but Tyler kept going, emboldened by the alcohol and the false sense of security. "I am telling you guys, it is just a matter of weeks," he bragged, leaning forward conspiratorially. "His health is crashing. The doctors don't know what is wrong with him, but he is getting weaker every day. He can barely walk up the stairs without wheezing." I felt a cold rage harden in my stomach. He was describing the symptoms of the arsenic poisoning with the pride of an architect describing a building. He wasn't sad. He was impatient. "So what happens when he kicks the bucket?" the friend asked. Tyler grinned, a predatory expression that distorted his handsome face. When he goes, I get everything. The company, the house, the offshore accounts. Everything is in Vanessa's name and she is wrapping him around her little finger. We signed the new will yesterday. Once he is gone, I am the king of the Castle Boys. I will be the chairman of the board by Christmas. I watched the audio waveform on my phone spike with every word. I had it. I had the confession. He wasn't just waiting for me to die, he was actively anticipating it, counting down the days until the poison finished the job. He had just admitted to a room full of witnesses that he knew I was dying and that he stood to gain everything from it. Combined with the toxicology report, this recording proved motive, means, and opportunity. I carefully reached out and tapped the stop button on my phone. The file saved instantly, uploading to the encrypted cloud server where Vance and my lawyer could access it. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. My hand brushed against the cool metal of the device and I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Tyler thought he was toasting to his future, but he had just read his own Miranda rights. Keep drinking, son, I thought. Enjoy the champagne. It is the last luxury you will ever taste. Tuesday evening, I decided to play my most dangerous card yet. I needed to know if there was a single shred of humanity left in the woman I had married, or if I was truly sleeping next to a monster. I waited until we were in the living room. Vanessa was reading a magazine on the sofa, sipping red wine, while I pretended to watch the news. I let my breathing become shallow and ragged. I gripped the armrest until my knuckles turned white, and then I let out a strangled gasp, clutching my chest with both hands. I threw myself forward, knocking over a heavy brass floor lamp. It crashed against the coffee table, shattering a crystal vase. The noise was deafening. I collapsed onto the Persian rug, writhing in feigned agony, pressing my hand over my heart and squeezing my eyes shut. I waited for the scream. I waited for her to rush to my side, to fumble for her phone, to dial 911. But the room remained silent. I cracked my eyelids just a fraction. Vanessa hadn't moved. She was sitting there on the sofa, looking down at me over the rim of her wine glass. Her expression wasn't panic. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity. She watched me struggle for air like a scientist observing a rat in a maze. She took another sip of wine. Then slowly, calmly, she picked up her phone. She didn't dial emergency services. She pressed a speed dial number. Tyler, she said, her voice steady and low. Get over here. Now. I think it is happening. I lay on the floor, groaning, acting the part of a dying man, but my mind was razor sharp. I heard Tyler's voice on the other end, tinny and excited through the speaker. Is he conscious? Tyler asked. Barely, Vanessa replied, standing up and walking over to me. She nudged my leg with her toe. He is clutching his chest. He looks like he can't breathe. Did you call the ambulance? Tyler asked. No, Vanessa said. Not yet. Good, Tyler said. Don't. Wait 10 minutes. If he dies before those paramedics get there, it saves us a lot of trouble. We have the will. We have the power of attorney. If he dies tonight, we don't have to wait for the baby. Just let him fade out, Ness. Open another bottle of wine and wait. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the floor seep into my bones. They weren't just greedy. They were executioners. They were discussing my death with the casual practicality of people discussing a plumbing repair. Wait 10 minutes. That was the value of my life to them. 10 minutes of silence. I knew I couldn't lay there any longer. If I waited, they might decide to help the process along with a pillow over my face. I had seen what I needed to see. The test was over, and they had failed spectacularly. I let out a loud, dramatic cough, forcing air into my lungs. I convulsed violently and then sat up, gasping for breath, my hand still clutching my chest. Richard, Vanessa shrieked, jumping back. Her phone clattered to the floor. The look on her face wasn't relief. It was pure, unadulterated disappointment. For a split second, she looked like she wanted to kick me back down. Oh my God, she stammered, her mask sliding back into place. Richard, you are awake. I was just calling for help. I was so scared. I looked at her. I looked at the phone on the floor, where Tyler was probably still listening. I saw the lie in her eyes. I am okay, I wheezed, forcing myself to stand up on shaky legs. It passed. It was just a spasm. I need water. I walked past her, bumping her shoulder. I didn't look back. I knew that if I looked at her, I would kill her right there in the living room. I walked to the kitchen, my heart pounding, not from a heart attack, but from the adrenaline of survival. I had stared death in the face, and it had my wife's eyes. They wanted me dead tonight. Well, they would have to wait. Because I had a party to attend. The morning after my staged heart attack, Vanessa didn't waste a second on sympathy. She had seen me brush against death, and her takeaway wasn't that life is precious, but that time is money. She sat at the breakfast table, aggressively flipping through a glossy event planning brochure. She looked up at me, her eyes gleaming with a manic sort of ambition. Richard, we need to do this properly, she announced, slamming the brochure down next to my black coffee. The world needs to know about our miracle. We are not just having a baby shower. We are having a gender reveal gala. She said the word gala like it was a royal decree. I want the grand ballroom at the St. Regis, she continued, ticking off items on her fingers. I want the editor of Vogue there. I want the entire board of directors. I want your competitors. I want everyone to see that the Dalton line is strong, that we are the future. I watched her over the rim of my cup. She wasn't planning a celebration for a child. She was planning a coronation for herself. She wanted to parade her belly in front of high society, to cement her status as the matriarch before she murdered the patriarch. She wanted to make sure that when I died next week, everyone would already see her as the grieving but powerful mother of the heir. It was bold, it was arrogant, and it was exactly what I needed. She was offering to gather every single person who mattered in my life into one room so I could destroy her in front of them all at once. I smiled a weak, doting smile. You are right, my love, I said, my voice raspy. You deserve the best. We should show the world our happiness. Spare no expense. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the Centurion card. The black titanium felt cool in my fingers. This was the card linked to the account where I had deposited the $5 million from the mortgage, the money that belonged to the bank. Here, I said, sliding it across the marble table. Book it all. The flowers, the champagne, the orchestra. Make it the biggest party this city has ever seen. Vanessa snatched the card, her fingers brushing against mine without a hint of warmth. Her eyes were locked on the credit limit. She thought she was spending my fortune, draining my liquidity to build her shrine. She had no idea she was spending debt. She was throwing a party with money that would turn into a foreclosure notice the moment the music stopped. She spent the rest of the day on the phone screaming at caterers and florists, demanding out-of-season peonies and vintage Dom Perignon. Tyler came over in the afternoon, ostensibly to check on my health, but really to help her plan the guest list. I heard them in the library laughing. We have to invite the senator, Tyler said, and the partners from the law firm. We need witnesses when we take the throne. I sat in my study listening to them construct the stage for their own execution. They were inviting the press. They were inviting the police commissioner. They were inviting the very people who would testify against them. I picked up my phone and called Vance. It is happening on Saturday, I whispered. Get the video ready. They are building the theater. We just need to bring the movie. I looked out the window at the manicured lawn. Vanessa was outside now, showing the event planner where she wanted the fireworks to go. She wanted to go out with a bang. I would make sure she got one. But it wouldn't be the kind of fireworks she was expecting. She was building a monument to her victory. I was building a gallows, and she was paying for the rope. Thursday morning was the final step in closing the trap. I drove Vanessa to the clinic under the pretense of a final pre-party checkup. She was in high spirits talking about the floral arrangements and the seating chart, oblivious to the fact that we were heading to her interrogation. When we arrived, Dr. Evans was waiting with a grim expression that silenced her chatter immediately. He didn't waste time. He told her that the latest scan showed a potential irregularity in the fetal heart rate, and he needed to perform an amniocentesis immediately to rule out genetic defects. Vanessa turned pale. She wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what amniotic fluid contained. It contained the baby's DNA. It contained the truth. "No," she snapped, pulling her arm away. "I am not doing that. It is invasive. It risks a miscarriage. The baby is fine." Dr. Evans played his part to perfection. He dropped his clipboard on the metal counter, creating a harsh clang that made her jump. "Mrs. Dalton, this isn't a suggestion. If the child has the condition, I suspect the pressure of a natural birth could crush its ribcage. Do you want to risk your child dying in the delivery room because you were afraid of a needle?" Vanessa looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. She was trapped. If she refused, she looked like a negligent mother who didn't care about the baby's safety. If she agreed, she handed over the genetic code that would destroy her life. She was looking for an out for me to step in and save her. "Richard, tell him," she pleaded, grabbing my hand. "Tell him we can wait." I squeezed her hand, the same hand that had put poison in my coffee an hour earlier. "Vanessa," I said, my voice thick with fake concern. "We have to listen to the doctor. I cannot lose this baby. I cannot lose our legacy. Please do it for me. Do it for us." I saw the fight leave her body. She was cornered by her own lies. She couldn't argue against the safety of the baby she had used to manipulate me. Reluctantly, she laid back on the table and pulled up her shirt, exposing the belly that held the ultimate betrayal. I watched with cold fascination as Dr. Evans prepared the long needle. Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut, tears of fear leaking out. She wasn't crying for the baby. She was crying because she knew the walls were closing in, even if she couldn't see them yet. The needle pierced her skin, and I watched the syringe fill with the pale yellow fluid. To anyone else, it was just a medical procedure. To me, it was the extraction of a confession. That vial held the biological proof that Tyler was the father. It was the final nail in their coffin. Dr. Evans capped the vial and looked at me over his mask. His eyes said everything. We had it. I helped Vanessa sit up, acting the doting husband, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "You were so brave, my love," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "You did the right thing." She looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of genuine terror in her eyes. She sensed something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She just nodded, shaky and pale. She thought the hard part was over. She didn't know that the fluid in that vial was about to be rushed to a lab, and the results would be projected onto a 20-foot screen in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress. We walked out of the clinic arm in arm. She was holding on to me for support. I was holding on to her to make sure she didn't run before the execution. It was Friday afternoon, exactly 24 hours before the gala, when the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The courier envelope sat on my desk, heavy with the weight of absolute truth. It was marked confidential from the genetic testing lab. My hands were steady as I sliced it open with a letter opener, the sharp sound cutting through the silence of the study. I pulled out the single sheet of paper. There it was in black and white. Probability of paternity 99.99%. The alleged father was listed clearly. Tyler Dalton. I stared at the numbers. Even though I had known the truth in my gut for weeks, seeing it printed there in scientific indisputable fact was a strange sensation. It wasn't pain anymore. It was validation. I wasn't a crazy, jealous old man imagining things. I was a man who had been right all along. The biological evidence proved that my wife and my stepson had committed the ultimate fraud. They intended to pass off this bastard child as the heir to my empire, ensuring they kept control long after they murdered me. I folded the paper carefully and set it aside. Now the real work began. I turned to my computer and opened the video editing software. I wasn't just a CEO today, I was a director, and I was about to produce the most important film of my life. I started with the video footage from the penthouse. I scrubbed through the timeline, finding the most damning moments. I chose the clip where they laughed about me being a walking wallet. I wanted the audience to see their faces twisted in mockery. I wanted the board members to see the disrespect. I dragged the file into the project. Next came the audio. The recording from Tyler's birthday party. I cleaned up the background noise, isolating his voice so it rang out clear and cold. I am telling you guys, it is just a matter of weeks. His health is crashing. When he kicks the bucket, I get everything. It was a confession of premeditated murder. I layered it over the video, creating a horrifying harmony of their betrayal. Finally, I scanned the DNA report. I highlighted the name Tyler Dalton and the 99% probability in bright red. I placed this image at the very end of the slideshow. The punchline. The grand finale. I watched the preview. It was 5 minutes of pure destruction. It was grotesque. It was explicit. It was undeniable. It would ruin their reputations forever. It would strip them of their social standing, their friends, and their freedom. I saved the file simply as the reveal. I took a small silver USB drive and plugged it into the port. I watched the progress bar fill up green. 100% complete. The weapon was loaded. There was a knock at the door. I quickly pulled the drive out and slipped it into my pocket just as Vanessa breezed in. She was holding 2 ties, one pink and one blue. "Richard, darling," she chirped, her face glowing with excitement. "Which one should you wear tomorrow? We have to coordinate. The florist is bringing thousands of hydrangeas. It is going to be magical." I looked at her. She was so happy, so confident in her victory. She thought she was organizing the happiest day of her life. She had no idea she was decorating her own scaffold. "Wear the blue one," I said, smiling calmly. "It matches your eyes, and it matches the surprise I have planned." "Oh, I love surprises," she clapped her hands. "You are the best husband." She kissed my cheek and danced out of the room, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume in the air. I reached into my pocket and ran my thumb over the cold metal of the USB drive. "Magical," she had said. Yes, it was going to be magical. I was going to make her entire world disappear with the click of a button. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis smelled like a botanical garden and old money. Thousands of white hydrangeas and cream-colored peonies covered every surface, cascading down the walls and spilling over the edges of the 20-foot stage. It was a scene of aggressive opulence, the kind of display that screams wealth so loud it drowns out good taste. 200 of the city's elite were packed into the space, sipping vintage Dom Perignon that flowed like water from a tapped spring. The air was thick with the murmur of gossip and the clinking of crystal glasses, a symphony of excess that Vanessa had conducted perfectly. She stood at the entrance, greeting guests with a radiance that was almost blinding. She wore a custom silk gown that clung to her curves, shimmering under the massive crystal chandelier. Beside her stood Tyler, looking every inch the young prince in a midnight blue tuxedo that I had unknowingly paid for. They looked less like a mother and stepson, and more like the king and queen of a newly conquered country. They laughed, they touched arms, they accepted congratulations with a smug confidence that made my stomach turn. To the casual observer, they were the picture of a happy, supportive family welcoming a new life. To me, they were actors taking their final bow before the theater burned down. I stood near the back of the room by the heavy velvet curtains, a stark contrast to the pastel explosion around me. I wore a black suit, severe and sharp. It was the same suit I wore to board meetings when I had to fire someone. It was the same suit I wore to funerals. And in a way, that is exactly what this was. I wasn't here to celebrate a birth. I was here to officiate the funeral of their social standing. I watched as the senator shook Tyler's hand, clapping him on the back. I saw my business partners fawning over Vanessa cooing at her barely visible baby bump. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They were toasting to a fortune that no longer existed. They were admiring a dynasty that I had already dismantled. Every flower petal, every drop of champagne, every light bulb in this room was paid for with money that the bank would be demanding back in 30 days. They were partying in a house of cards, and I was the only one who could see the wind coming. Tyler caught my eye across the room. He raised his glass in a mock salute, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought I was standing in the shadows, because I was weak, because I was the old man being pushed aside to make room for the new generation. He didn't know that the shadows were where the predator hid. He didn't know that the small silver drav in my pocket weighed more than the entire building. I nodded back at him, my face completely blank. Enjoy it, son, I thought. Drink the wine. Bask in the admiration. Let the lights blind you. Because when those lights go out and the screen comes down, you are going to wish you had never stepped foot in this room. The orchestra swelled, playing a triumphant waltz. It was time. The stage was set, the audience was seated, and the victims had walked right onto the trapdoor. I adjusted my cuffs, took a deep breath of the expensive air, and stepped out of the shadows to join the party. The room fell silent as the orchestra lowered their instruments, and the heavy velvet curtains behind the stage seemed to darken. The massive 5-tier cake stood in the center of the platform, a monument to sugar and lies. I adjusted my cuffs and began the slow ascent up the stairs. Every step echoed on the wooden stage. I could feel the eyes of 200 people on my back, but I was only focused on 2 pairs of eyes. Vanessa and Tyler stood to my left, holding hands like the innocent, expecting parents they were pretending to be. They watched me with a mixture of predatory anticipation and mild annoyance. They wanted me to say my piece, sign the check, and get off the stage so they could be the stars. I took the microphone from the stand. It felt heavy, cold, and solid like a gavel. I looked out at the sea of faces, the business partners who had betrayed me, the friends who were really just acquaintances of my wallet, and the strangers who were there for the free champagne. I let the silence stretch out for 5 long seconds. The tension began to ripple through the room. Thank you all for being here tonight. I began, my voice low and slightly tremulous, playing the part of the sentimental old man one last time. It warms my heart to see so many friends gathered to celebrate the future of the Dalton family. You look at us and you see a legacy. You see a loving wife. You see a devoted stepson. You see a man who has been blessed with everything a man could ask for. I turned, slightly pivoting my body to face Vanessa and Tyler directly. They smiled back, the practiced plastic smiles of models in a catalog. But I saw the tightness in Tyler's jaw. I saw the way Vanessa's fingers dug into her palm. They were waiting for the announcement. They expected me to step down. They expected me to hand over the keys to the kingdom right then and there. In a way, I was about to do exactly that. For the past few months, I have been doing a lot of thinking about inheritance. I continued, my voice growing stronger, shedding the rasp, shedding the weakness. I have been thinking about what we leave behind, about truth, about loyalty, and about the consequences of our actions. Vanessa's smile faltered just a fraction. A flicker of confusion passed over her eyes. I wasn't sticking to the script. I wasn't reading the cue cards she had mentally prepared for me. And I realized that I couldn't wait until I was gone to show you how much I appreciate everything you have done for me, I said, my voice now ice cold, devoid of any warmth. The way you have cared for my health, the way you have managed my finances, the way you have loved me, it has been truly revealing. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in frequency. This wasn't a toast anymore. It was a sentencing. So today, right now, I want to give my wife and my stepson a special gift, I announced, raising my voice so it boomed through the speakers without a hint of tremor. A gift that reflects exactly who you are. A gift that reveals the absolute truth of this family. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver USB drive, holding it up to the light like a jewel. Tyler's eyes locked onto it, and I saw the color drain from his face. He knew. In that split second, he knew. I turned to the projectionist in the back of the room and gave a sharp nod. "Let us see what we are really celebrating," I said. And then I stepped back into the shadows, leaving them alone in the spotlight, as the giant screen behind them flickered to life. The chandeliers dimmed until the ballroom was plunged into near total darkness, save for the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. A hush fell over the crowd, a collective holding of breath as 200 people craned their necks toward the massive screen, expecting to see the grainy, heartwarming pulse of a fetal heartbeat. They were ready to applaud. They were ready to coo over the miracle of life. Instead, the screen exploded into harsh, high-contrast light. It wasn't an ultrasound. It was a nightmare in high definition. The video feed was crisp and brutal. It showed the interior of the penthouse bedroom, the very apartment Tyler had bragged about owning. The angle was high, looking down from the smoke detector I had installed. On the screen, two figures were tangled together in a mess of sheets. There was no ambiguity. There was no way to deny who they were. The camera captured Tyler's distinctive tattoo on his shoulder. It caught the glint of the diamond necklace I had given Vanessa for our anniversary, the same one she was wearing right now on stage. A gasp tore through the room, a sound so visceral, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the space. Someone near the front dropped a champagne flute, and the crash of breaking glass echoed like a gunshot. But nobody moved. They were paralyzed by the sheer audacity of what they were seeing. Then came the sound. I had instructed the audio engineer to crank the volume to the maximum. Tyler's voice boomed through the concert-grade speakers surrounding us, filling every corner of the ballroom. "He is so stupid, Ness," he laughed on the screen, his voice dripping with contempt. "He actually thinks the baby is his. He was crying about it." "It is pathetic." On screen, Vanessa giggled, stroking his hair. "Just let him cry, baby. As long as he signs the will, he can cry all he wants." "Did you put the drops in his coffee today?" "Yeah," Tyler replied. "Double dose like you said. He will be dead before the baby is born. Then we take the cash and dump the body." The reaction in the room shifted instantly from scandal to horror. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a confession of conspiracy to commit capital murder. I saw the senator cover his mouth with his hand, his eyes wide. I saw my business partners recoiling as if the toxicity of the video was physically contagious. The women in their gowns clutched their pearls and the men stiffened their jaws. I looked at the stage. Vanessa and Tyler were bathed in the flickering light of their own crime. They were frozen. Vanessa's hands were clamped over her mouth, her eyes bulging as she watched herself plot the death of the man standing 10 feet away from her. She looked like a deer in the headlights of a semi-truck. Tyler was shaking his face drained of all color, looking from the screen to the crowd, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. The giant screen loomed over them, a digital judge broadcasting their sins to the very people they had tried to impress. The applause they had wanted had turned into a suffocating blanket of judgment. For the first time in their lives, they were truly seen, and the sight was hideous. The video feed cut to black, leaving the audience in a stunned, vibrating silence, but I was not done. The screen flickered once more, replacing the moving nightmare of the bedroom with the static brutality of bureaucracy. Two documents appeared side by side, projected 20 feet high for all the world to see. On the left was a scanned medical certificate from the Geneva Clinic dated May 14, 2005. It was yellowed with age, but the stamp was bright red and unmistakable. It was a certificate of sterilization, a vasectomy. I had undergone the procedure 20 years ago, a year after my first wife passed away, deciding that I was done bringing children into a world that could be so cruel. I never told a soul. I kept it as a private insurance policy, a secret weapon tucked away in a safe deposit box against exactly this kind of deception. On the right side of the screen was the document from yesterday, the results of the amniocentesis. The graphics were crisp and modern. A bright red bar graph shot up to the very top of the chart. The text was bold and damning. Probability of paternity 99.99%. And the name listed under biological father was not Richard Dalton. It was Tyler Dalton. The collective gasp that went through the ballroom sucked the oxygen out of the air. People were doing the math in their heads. The whispers started like a brush fire and quickly turned into a roar of realization. If Richard was sterile since 2005, then the miracle baby was a lie. If the DNA matched Tyler, then the betrayal was incestuous. I stepped back up to the microphone. The metal was cold against my palm. I looked down at Vanessa. She had fallen to her knees on the stage, her expensive silk gown pooling around her. She was staring up at the date on the vasectomy certificate, her eyes wide and vacant. She was realizing that every single time she had rubbed her belly and smiled at me, every time she had talked about our son's future, I had known. I had been watching her perform a play where I already knew the ending. I turned my gaze to Tyler. He was backed against the wall of flowers, his face the color of ash. He looked at the DNA result and then at the crowd. He saw the disgust in their eyes. He saw the senator turning his back. He saw the socialites covering their mouths. I leaned into the mic, my voice booming through the speakers, calm and deadly. You see, everyone there seems to be a confusion about the Dalton lineage. Vanessa wanted to secure her future. She wanted a biological tie to the fortune. But she made a critical error in her calculations. I pointed a finger at the screen. I cannot give you a child, Vanessa, I said. But it seems you found a willing donor right here in my house. I looked at Tyler. He tried to look away, but there was nowhere to hide. Congratulations, Tyler, I said, allowing a small, cruel smile to touch my lips. You have achieved something truly historic today. You are not just a thief. You are not just a traitor. You are going to be a father. And thanks to your relationship with your stepmother, the child you are bringing to this world is your own brother. The crowd erupted. It wasn't applause. It was a sound of pure revulsion. A woman in the front row actually retched. The shame was palpable, a physical weight that crushed down on the two figures on stage. Tyler covered his face with his hands, trying to block out the lights, trying to block out the truth. But it was too late. The secret was out, and it was uglier than anyone could have imagined. I stood there, the sterile, dying old man, and watched them drown in the cesspool of their own making. The silence that followed my announcement was shattered by a sound that was less human and more like the howl of a wounded animal. Tyler snapped. The shame was too much for his fragile ego to bear, and his brain short-circuited, bypassing logic and going straight to violence. He didn't look like a smooth socialite anymore. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, the veins in his neck bulging as he let out a guttural scream that echoed off the high ceilings. "You old bastard!" he roared, lunging forward. "I will kill you!" He charged across the stage, knocking over a pedestal of white hydrangeas, sending the vase crashing to the floor in a spray of water and glass. He was fast fueled by the adrenaline of a man who has lost everything, but I didn't move a muscle. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I simply watched him come just as I had watched him on the screen, because I had prepared for this moment just as meticulously as I had prepared the video. Two shadows detached themselves from the darkness of the wings. They were massive men professionals I had hired from a private security firm, specifically for their discretion and their speed. Before Tyler could get within 5 feet of me, they intercepted him. It wasn't a fight. It was a demolition. The lead guard, a man with hands the size of shovels, caught Tyler mid-stride and slammed him into the floorboards. The impact shook the stage. Tyler's expensive tuxedo ripped at the shoulder, and his face was pressed hard against the wood right next to my polished shoes. He thrashed and cursed, spitting threats, but he was pinned helpless as a child. Vanessa, seeing her lover neutralized and realizing that the violence had turned the crowd against them, completely decided to play her last card. She let out a soft, theatrical moan. Her hand went to her forehead, and she crumpled to the ground, her silk dress fanning out around her like a dying flower. It was a practiced fall designed to elicit sympathy, designed to make someone rush to her aid. She lay there, eyes closed, waiting for the gasp, waiting for the concerned hands to lift her up. But nobody moved. The audience stared at her with cold indifference. The women who had been fawning over her 10 minutes ago now looked at her like she was something they had stepped in. She was left lying on the hard stage, humiliated by the lack of attention, forced to hold the pose while the silence stretched on. Then came the phones. It started with 1, then 10, then 100. The guests weren't calling for help. They were holding up their devices, the screens glowing in the dim light, recording the carnage. They were live-streaming the downfall of the Dalton family to the world. I saw the flashes popping, capturing Tyler's struggle and Vanessa's fake unconsciousness. We were trending. The violence, the betrayal, the DNA results, it was all being beamed out instantly. I looked down at Tyler, who was still struggling against the guard's knee, and then at Vanessa, who was peeking through her lashes, terrified that no one cared. The chaos was swirling around me, but I stood in the center of the storm, untouched. The physical attack had failed, just like their emotional attack. I adjusted my jacket, signaled the guards to hold him down, and watched the world consume them. The double doors at the back of the ballroom flew open with a force that rattled the crystal stemware on the tables. It wasn't the caterers bringing another round of vintage champagne. It was the heavy, synchronized boot steps of the NYPD. The blue and red strobe lights from the squad cars parked outside cut through the elegant dimness of the room, painting the white hydrangeas in harsh flashes of police colors. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, retreating to the walls, their phones still raised, but their faces now pale with the realization that this wasn't just a scandal, it was a crime scene. Detective Miller, a man I had been coordinating with for the last 24 hours, led the charge. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the decorations. He marched straight up the stairs to the stage, his badge catching the light. He looked like sanity walking into a madhouse. Vanessa miraculously recovered from her fainting spell the moment the officers stepped onto the platform. She scrambled backward on her hands and knees, her expensive silk gown bunching up around her, trying to put distance between herself and the law. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading, expecting me to stop this. She thought I was still her husband. She thought there was still a shred of the man she had manipulated. She was wrong. Vanessa Dalton, Detective Miller announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit capital murder, grand larceny, and fraud. No. Vanessa screamed as a female officer grabbed her wrists. You can't do this. I am pregnant. You are hurting the baby. Richard, tell them. Tell them it is a mistake. I looked down at her. The woman who had poisoned my risotto. The woman who had laughed about my death. I didn't say a word. I just watched as the officer pulled her hands behind her back. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a steel trap snapping shut. Miller turned to Tyler, who was still pinned to the floor by my security guards. The guards stepped back, allowing the police to haul him to his feet. Tyler was limp. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a child who had been caught breaking a window. Only the window was my life and the rock was arsenic. Tyler Dalton, Miller said, holding up a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was the glass vial of arsenic they had recovered from Vanessa's vanity based on my tip. We have the toxicology report from Mr. Dalton's blood. We have the recording of you conspiring to increase the dosage. You are under arrest for attempted murder and the theft of $500,000 from the First National Bank." Tyler didn't fight. He slumped forward, his head hanging low, staring at his shoes. The tuxedo I had paid for was torn. The reputation he had tried to build was in ashes. He was being cuffed in front of the very people he had tried to impress with his stolen wealth. "Take them away," Miller ordered. The officers began to march them out. They were paraded through the center of the ballroom, a walk of shame that was being broadcast live to the internet. I watched them go. I watched the senator turn his back as they passed. I watched the socialites recoil, pulling their skirts away so they wouldn't be touched by the criminals. They were dragged past the flowers, past the cake, past the life they thought they deserved, and out into the cold night air where the sirens were waiting. I stood alone on the stage, the microphone still in my hand. The room was silent, save for the distant wail of the police cars fading away. The performance was over. The actors had been removed. I looked out at the stunned audience, and for the first time in months, I took a deep, clean breath. My chest didn't hurt. My heart beat steady and strong. The poison was gone. The parasites were gone. I was alone, but I was alive. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed overhead, a harsh replacement for the crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis. I stood behind the one-way mirror in the observation room, watching the silent film of their desperation playing out. Tyler was seated at the metal table, still wearing his torn tuxedo, the midnight blue fabric now stained with stage dust and sweat. He was screaming at the officer, demanding his phone, demanding his lawyer, demanding his rights. He still thought he was a Dalton. He still thought the name was a magic spell that could open any door, including the heavy steel one locking him in. He was waiting for Arthur Sterling, the high-powered defense attorney I had kept on retainer for years. Sterling was the kind of lawyer who could make a DUI disappearance before the paperwork was filed. Tyler looked at the door with expectant arrogance, confident that in 5 minutes, a man in a $3,000 suit would walk in, slap a check on the desk, and walk him out to a waiting limousine. And Sterling did arrive. He walked into the interrogation room with his usual swagger, placing his briefcase on the table. Tyler slumped back in his chair, a look of smug relief washing over his face. He pointed at the mirror, as if he knew I was watching, and sneered. "See," he seemed to say, "you can't touch me." But then James Blackwood walked in. My lawyer didn't look like a savior. He looked like an executioner in a pinstripe suit. He didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table and placed a single thin file between Tyler and Sterling. "I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling." Blackwood said, his voice calm and carrying clearly through the speaker system to where I stood. "You are preparing to file for bail and retainment under the assumption that the Dalton estate will be covering the costs." Sterling paused, his pen hovering over the bail bond application. He looked at Tyler, then back at Blackwood. "Naturally," he said. "I have represented the family for a decade. Mr. Dalton has instructed me to inform you that all access to family accounts has been legally revoked as of yesterday." Blackwood continued, his tone devoid of emotion. "Furthermore, regarding the collateral you were planning to use for the bond, the mansion is currently leveraged to 100% of its value. I filed the paperwork this morning. The property is effectively a bank asset with negative equity. It is a debt trap, Mr. Sterling, not an asset." I watched the color drain from Tyler's face. He blinked, trying to process the words. "But the cards," Tyler stammered, his voice rising in panic. "The black card. There is a limit of $500,000. Just use that." Blackwood didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on Sterling. "The credit lines were authorized for family members only. Since the evidence presented tonight confirms that Mr. Tyler is not legally a dependent of Richard Dalton, and Mrs. Vanessa Dalton is currently under arrest for fraud, those cards have been canceled. They are worthless plastic." Sterling didn't hesitate. He was a mercenary, and he had just realized the war chest was empty. He closed his briefcase with a sharp final click. He looked at Tyler not with sympathy, but with the cold indifference of a business transaction that had fallen through. "I cannot represent you without a retainer, son," he said. "I suggest you ask for a public defender." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Tyler alone in the cold, stark light. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just in jail. He was destitute. He had no house, no money, no lawyer. He looked at his empty hands, the hands that had never done a day of hard work, and finally began to weep. It wasn't the cry of a repentant man. It was the terrified sob of a parasite that had just been ripped off its host. The two interrogation rooms were separated by a thin wall, but the sound of their betrayal could have pierced through steel. I stood in the hallway between the two observation windows, watching the final act of their tragedy unfold. It took less than 10 minutes for the passionate, illicit love affair to dissolve into a vicious dogfight. The police didn't even have to try very hard. They just placed a few photos on the table and let the rats turn on each other. In room A, Tyler was pacing like a caged animal. His sweat had soaked through the collar of his ruined shirt, and his eyes were darting around the room, looking for anyone to blame but himself. When Detective Miller asked him about the arsenic, Tyler practically screamed his answer. "It was her," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "It was all Vanessa. She is the one who bought it. She is the one who looked up the dosage. I didn't want to do it. She made me. She told me that if I didn't help her, she would cut me off. She is a predator detective. She seduced me. I am 20 years younger than her. She groomed me." I watched him spin a web of lies, trying to paint himself as the innocent victim of an older woman's manipulation. He claimed he was scared of her. He claimed he tried to stop her from putting the drops in my coffee. It was pathetic. The man who had sneered at me on the video, calling me a walking wallet, was now crying about being a pawn in her game. He was willing to send the mother of his child to the electric chair just to shave a few years off his own sentence. In room B, Vanessa was putting on an even more impressive performance. She had huddled herself into the corner of the chair, pulling her knees up to her chest, weeping into her hands. When the female officer asked about the conspiracy, Vanessa looked up with eyes full of terrified tears. "He is a monster," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "You don't know what he is like. He has a temper. He threatened me. He said that if I didn't get the money, he would hurt the baby. He forced me to sleep with him. He forced me to poison Richard. I loved my husband. I never wanted to hurt him. Tyler made me do it. He said he would kill us both if I didn't comply." I listened to her rewrite history, turning herself into the damsel in distress, held hostage by a violent stepson. She described him as a maniac, a brute who terrified her into submission. She conveniently forgot the giggling in the bedroom, the planning of the gender reveal party, the way she had looked at him with pure adoration just hours ago. The detectives moved back and forth, feeding them scraps of each other's testimony. When Miller told Tyler that Vanessa was calling him abusive, Tyler exploded, calling her every name in the book, describing her greed in graphic detail. When the officer told Vanessa that Tyler admitted she bought the poison, she shrieked, calling him a liar and a coward. They were tearing each other apart with the same passion they used to make love. It was a feeding frenzy. There was no loyalty. There was no bond. There was only the desperate, clawing need for self-preservation. I watched them pointing fingers, screaming accusations, willing to destroy the other person completely, just to save their own skin. I turned away from the glass, feeling a final sense of closure. I had wondered if what they had was real, if maybe in their twisted way they actually loved each other. But now I knew. They didn't love anyone. They were just two parasites who had latched onto the same host, and now that the host was gone, they were eating each other alive. I walked down the precinct hallway, leaving their screams behind me. They deserved each other, and they deserved the concrete cells that were waiting for them. The breeze off the Atlantic Ocean carries the scent of salt and freedom, a stark contrast to the stifling air of the Connecticut mansion I left behind. I sit on the expansive terrace of my new penthouse in Miami, watching the turquoise waves crash against the white sand. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold colors that seem brighter now that I am not seeing them through a haze of arsenic and betrayal. I am alone here, but for the first time in years, I do not feel lonely. I feel unburdened. The silence in this apartment is not the heavy, expectant silence of a tomb. It is the peaceful silence of a sanctuary. My phone buzzed on the glass table beside me, vibrating against the stem of my wine glass. I picked it up, expecting a message from Samuel about the new investments we are making with the offshore funds. Instead, I saw a number I didn't recognize with a correctional facility area code. I opened the message. It was a block of text, desperate and poorly spelled, likely typed hurriedly on a contraband phone smuggled into the cell block. "Dad, please. I know you are angry, but they are hurting me in here. I need money for the commissary. I need protection. Just $500. Please. I am begging you. I am still your son." I read the words and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no sadness. It was like reading a message from a stranger who had dialed the wrong number. He was still playing the game, still trying to pluck the strings of a heart he had tried to stop. He called me Dad not because he loved me, but because he needed a transaction. He was still the parasite looking for a vein, but the host was now out of reach. I didn't type a reply. I didn't write a lecture about consequences or morality. I simply lifted my glass of 1982 Bordeaux, holding it up against the backdrop of the stunning Miami sunset. The ruby liquid caught the fading light, glowing like a jewel. I snapped a photo. It was a perfect image of luxury, peace, and survival. I hit send. As soon as the delivered notification appeared, I pressed the block button. I deleted the number. I deleted the thread. With that one small digital motion, I severed the final necrotic limb of my past life. Tyler and Vanessa were no longer people to me. They were just a bad memory, a lesson learned in the hardest way possible. I took a sip of the wine. It was rich and complex, with no bitter aftertaste of poison. I leaned back in the lounge chair, closing my eyes and listening to the gulls call out overhead. I had lost a house, but I had built a home. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. The world is a beautiful place, but it is also a jungle. We like to think that civilization and manners protect us, but the laws of nature still apply. The predators don't always look like wolves. Sometimes they look like a beautiful wife or a smiling son. They hide in plain sight, waiting for you to close your eyes. I am an old man now, but I will never close my eyes again. I have learned that the greatest luxury in life isn't money or power. It is the ability to sleep soundly, knowing exactly who is in your house and knowing that you have the strength to show them the door. I finished my wine, smiled at the horizon, and finally, for the first time in a long time, I was truly at peace. The tragedy of the Dalton family serves as a stark reminder that the most dangerous enemies often sleep under our own roof. Blind trust is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability that the greedy will always exploit. Richard's survival proves that while we cannot control the malice of others, we can control our own awareness. True legacy isn't about the money you leave behind, but the dignity you keep when the wolves come knocking. Pay attention to the details, listen to your instincts, and never let your guard down even when the wine is being poured by a smiling face. What would you have done if you were in Richard's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.